Darkcast Network, the light shines brightest on our indie podcasts. Hello and welcome to Fuck That. One quick thing before we jump right into this week's episode. Don't forget, if you like what you hear, like, subscribe, shoot us a review wherever you listen. It really helps us out. All right, let's just jump right into the episode. So this case, I'm actually doing for somebody that's very important to me. I'm not going to say her name because I want to keep her privacy, but she is a mentor to me. She was there for me throughout my graduate degree and has helped me a lot professionally. So I'm doing this case for her. And this case is the murder of JoAnn Breton and Robert Breton Jr. And JoAnn Breton was actually her cousin. A couple of trigger warnings. There's a lot of domestic violence and extreme violence in this case. And I have linked domestic violence resources nationally and for the state of Connecticut, because this takes place in Connecticut, in the show notes. All right. So we're going to get into Robert Breton, who is the perpetrator of the crime. So this information is information that was given during testimony by a psychiatrist during his trial, but I'll elaborate on that later. According to public welfare records that began during Robert Sr.'s early childhood, they indicated that he had a very tumultuous upbringing. Before I get into this, I just want to say, I think it's okay for us to feel bad for him as a child, but I wholeheartedly believe that your shitty childhood is never an excuse.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful to understand maybe how somebody became an asshole.
But it's your responsibility, I think, as an adult to say, I went through this. It's my responsibility to seek treatment so that I can do better and not act the way that my parents acted. So.
Well, yeah, you still know right from wrong.
Yeah. So when Robert was born, his mother, Hazel Duffy, was married to an unknown man. She, at the time, was having an affair with Roland Breton, who was Ronald Sr.'s father. Hazel and Roland ended up getting married 2 years after Robert's birth, but the question of who was actually Robert's father, was it her husband or the man she was having an affair with, that was something that always remained in question and was a point of contention between all parties involved for years. Hazel, when Robert was born, was not able to take care of him, and her home was deemed unfit for a child. When Robert was 1, he was placed in an orphanage for an unknown period of time. Several of his family members reported that when he returned home back with his family, he was mute, he looked emaciated, disheveled, and he wouldn't let anybody touch him. So I think that it's obvious that he was abused wherever he was.
Oh, yeah.
Throughout his childhood, Roland was a huge drinker, and he became abusive when he drank. He sometimes was physically abusive, but it seemed to manifest mainly mentally and emotionally. He often threatened to kill his son when he was drunk, and unfortunately, Hazel also struggled with alcohol use disorder. They were drinking every day in that household. Robert did have a younger sister, Catherine. Allegedly, during one incident, Robert found his mother passed out in a gutter, and she was badly beaten. On another occasion, when Hazel had had too much to drink, she strangled and killed the family cat. This is really gross. This actually happened. But then she dismembered the cat and scattered the body parts throughout the home with 2 young kids.
In the house?
Yep. Yeah, it's really messed up. It gets worse. A horrible childhood.
And people wonder why people are fucked up.
Yeah. So Hazel wasn't a sex worker, but she would engage in sex work, particularly with a local package store owner. And she did this when she didn't have enough money to buy alcohol. So she would do it in an exchange, like, hey, give me liquor, and then in exchange, I'll do this. When she did do this, she would come home and intentionally shove it in Roland's face. So her spouse.
Was she buying booze for him too?
I don't know. Maybe, probably.
I wonder if it was a thing like, listen, like, I did this for you.
No.
Like,
so the way that the court documents made it seem is that she was doing it like a fuck you. Like, to make him mad. They had a very tumultuous relationship. So Hazel also ended up extorting money from her mother-in-law, Roland's mother, who, by all accounts, was a really sweet woman, by threatening to kill Robert Sr. and his sister Catherine unless she paid Hazel money.
Did that work?
Yes, she paid her money.
What?
Yeah, I mean, she's a sweet older woman, and Hazel obviously has mental health challenges. I mean, I think she probably didn't know what to do. I don't know. But
if I had some crazy drunk lady threatening me, I'd be like, whatever.
I don't know. She was probably scared. So they ended up separating, and at one point in time, I couldn't really confirm and pinpoint when, but Roland ends up moving out into his mother's home. But at this point, Robert and Catherine, there's so many names. Robert and Catherine are still at Hazel's home. So this is just a big trigger warning. There's going to be a lot of trigger warnings, but this is really, really just gross and awful. So just another trigger warning. One of the ways that Hazel punished specifically Robert was by stripping him down to nothing from the waist down and beating him with a belt on his behind and on his genitals. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of us have been spanked
on the behind, okay.
On the ass before.
That's understandable. But the other
thing's a little fucked up.
Inappropriate and also really wrong. I mean, that's just, I don't know.
And a lot more painful.
Yeah. So as he got older and entered his teenage years, his mother became very inappropriate with him, as if she didn't already cross that boundary already. She would get naked and just drink around the house all the time and just end up passing out drunk naked. It was really bizarre. And when she was 13, she ended up attempting to molest him. So I'm not going to elaborate on that because I just don't want to, and I don't think I need to say more than that. But she attempted very much to molest him. So after this, he ran away. But the police found him, and he told the police what happened, and they brought him back home. So at 16, Robert joins the Navy, hoping to get out of his family home forever, and I can't blame him for that. Unsurprisingly, he had a very hard time with the structure of military life, and he didn't do well with following orders. He's probably never had a parent telling him what to do, like in a structured parental manner, so he probably got into the Navy and was like, what is this? It's understandable. He was discharged a few months after that and returned back home. So the following year at 17, Robert ends up breaking into a neighbor's apartment with the intent to steal money, but for some reason he didn't steal anything. His sister does end up testifying at one of his trials that she thinks that he did this on purpose. He didn't intend to actually steal anything.
But he wanted to get caught?
But what he does next is intentional, yes, to get caught so that he'd be taken away from the home. So during this break-in, he spilled powder. I couldn't confirm what. I'm assuming maybe talcum or baby powder onto his boots. And this created a powder trail back to his mother's house, which got him caught. Yeah, he probably did it on purpose to get caught, which is sad. You're faking a crime so that you can just get taken into police custody to get out of your house.
I'm just thinking of this dude putting powder on it. He must have had to powder his boots multiple times.
It sounded like he lived in an apartment building and it was the next apartment over, so probably not that far.
It was easy. All right.
So after this, at around 18, he went to live with his father, who also lived with his mother, so Robert's grandmother. So at this point, the question of whether Roland was actually his father or Hazel's husband at the time was still something that really bothered Robert and caused a lot of problems with him and his father when he moved in. Roland did try to smooth things over at one point by obtaining a copy of Robert's birth certificate, but this didn't really prove anything because, I mean, you could have really anybody's name.
Yeah, I mean, short of a paternity test.
Yeah.
There's no way to say 100%, indisputably.
Yeah, so this didn't fix the issue. And they just continued to have strain. But also, to be fair, Roland was drinking alcohol heavily. Robert probably already has PTSD at this point, so it's just an eruption waiting to happen. So Roland was drinking heavily every day and often threatened his mother as well as Robert, and he carried a knife on him wherever he went. On December 3rd, 1966, Roland left the house to go out drinking and allegedly was telling people that were around him that evening that it was finally time for him to kill Robert, which is a strange thing to say. He came home and threatened Robert, pushed the kitchen table into him, and threw him into the wall. So, according to what Robert had said, Robert tried to escape his father, running to the bathroom and yelling to his grandmother to call the police. Robert stated that Roland began to attack his mother, so Robert exited the bathroom, grabbed a knife, and stabbed his father. Robert ends up stating to Dr. Borden, who's the psychiatrist that I had mentioned previously, and we'll talk more about him later, but he stated to this doctor that he did not remember stabbing his father, but he remembered grabbing the knife and then seeing his father fall to the ground. convenient. He doesn't remember anything in between.
So from what you just said, to me, it sounds almost premeditated, right? He said it was time to kill his father.
No,
and then this fight
Roland
happened?
said that when he was out. And then he came home and attacked Robert, his son.
Gotcha.
Roland threatened to kill his son.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So in this instance, they get into a fight and Robert's just defending himself.
Okay.
It wasn't his intention to.
Right. All right. So
You know.
self-defense.
So Robert ran out of the house and found a police officer who came back with him to the house. Roland died from multiple stab wounds to the face and chest and neck. Robert confessed to stabbing his father and he pleaded guilty to manslaughter, but this ended up in him receiving a suspended sentence.
Because of the nature of the incident?
Yeah. So Robert met JoAnn shortly after his father's death, and the two married in December of 1967, and this was within a few days of the first anniversary of the day that he killed his father. Robert depended on JoAnn for almost everything, especially psychological support, but this is not her responsibility, and it's not fair to put that on a young woman. So he's also a couple of years older than her. So he's probably like 21 at this point, and she might be like 18 or 19. So she's young. Robert was a controlling, possessive, and jealous spouse to JoAnn, and he was paranoid that she was unfaithful, which she was not. Robert began having paranoid delusions about JoAnn pretty early into the relationship. After a bad fight one particular evening, JoAnn decided to leave the family home, which is smart. It escalated, and she decided to remove herself, which is the right thing to do. Robert got really aggravated. He went to look for JoAnn. And according to Robert's account of this event to the psychiatrist, he found JoAnn walking in the street looking disheveled. So Robert automatically assumed that this meant that JoAnn was sexually assaulted. No other, that's it. Even though she had just left the house. Yep, I know.
That's a big leap.
Big leap. So after he picked her up, they went to a random coffee shop where they saw three men there. And Robert had concluded that these three men were the men that sexually assaulted JoAnn. And Robert actually admitted that he had fantasies about murdering these completely random men for years. Robert later told Dr. Borden that JoAnn had admitted to being sexually assaulted, but Dr. Borden testified that he wholeheartedly believed that she was forced into this confession by Robert, and she was never actually sexually assaulted. But this, I think, is just a testament to how paranoid and delusional he is. Like, he's just making these insane scenarios up in his head, and they're ramping up.
Does he have any diagnosis, like any psychiatric diagnosis?
Not yet.
Okay.
So shortly after Robert and JoAnn married, he began working at Somers Thin Strip Company. He worked there until he was laid off in 1985 because the company went through a reorganization. When Robert was laid off, he began drinking regularly and using pills. Robert and JoAnn's relationship was already really rocky due to his personal issues, and this obviously made things much worse. They did have a son together, Robert Jr., but on Mother's Day of 1986, Robert and JoAnn got into this is the dumbest argument I've ever heard of in my entire life. I'm not just saying this because JoAnn's the victim and I'm a woman, but actually I read this and I was like, this is absolutely insane. It makes no sense. So Robert got mad at JoAnn because it was Mother's Day and she wanted to visit her mother who was living instead of spending the day at his mother, who respectfully was abusive and drank and tried to molest him, and who was also dead. So he's like, no, we're going to just sit at her grave all day. And JoAnn's like, I would like to visit my mother who's living. And
I'm surprised he even wanted to visit his mother's grave.
He's got, I understand and respect that he probably still cares about her, even though their relationship was tumultuous. But come on, you're going to deprive your wife of going to visit her mother who's living on Mother's Day. So he got so pissed at her that he's like, just leave me. So she was like, all right, like a boss. I think at that point she just had enough, and I respect it.
Just leave me for the day?
No,
or leave me I'm done with you?
He was like coaxing her to divorce him. So she's like, okay, I will. And she filed for divorce.
Good.
I know. She's a boss. I like her. So she filed for divorce, and this began in July of 1986, so a couple months after Mother's Day. And the divorce finalized in January of 1987. So Throughout the divorce proceedings, Robert sunk deeper into a depression, which I understand. You know, he already has mental health challenges, and I get that. And I do sympathize with that
He probably
aspect.
wasn't expecting her to call his bluff either.
No, but I mean, I don't want to say I'm glad because it didn't end well because of what he did, but I'm glad that she had the strength to say this is not healthy and I need to remove myself and my son from this situation.
Yeah, I'm out.
So he began to drink even more, and he began abusing Desoxyn, which is an ADHD medication, and Fiorinol, which is essentially butalbital, aspirin, and caffeine. Robert's birthday was in December, so we're going to skip to December of 1987. This is also the anniversary of his father's death, remember, and it's also the anniversary of him and JoAnn's marriage. But this particular December would have been their 20th anniversary, and this was a major trigger for him because it's his birthday, he's alone, it's the anniversary of when he murdered his father, and now it's not a 20th anniversary for him and JoAnn, so he is not in a good headspace whatsoever. It's a perfect storm. He was obviously way more upset and unstable during this month, and leading up to the events that we're going to talk about, Robert was harassing JoAnn incessantly, trying to get back with her. On December 9th, he showed up where she worked. This isn't appropriate. Please don't do this, people. This is just keep somebody's job out of this. Thank you. With flowers, he ended up bringing wine, her favorite wine, to her apartment, settled an issue that she was having with a vehicle registration, which, to be fair, the DMV is a nightmare in Connecticut, in my opinion, especially Waterbury's DMV. I don't even want to know. Forget it.
So he did something actually useful.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I mean, this guy is abusive, and this is how we've talked about it in the Susan Cox Powell case. This is a classic cycle of abuse. The abuser will love bomb and try to bring their victim in, and then the abuse will just continue again.
Right. You have a nice period.
Yeah,
where
this is
everything's
not,
good, and then,
he's not a changed man.
and then
This
it
is
goes to
just
shit
a
again.
manipulation tactic. So JoAnn had actually had a trip to Florida planned with her son, Robert Jr. So Robert Sr. brought suitcases to their house that they could use for the trip. And then he ended up deciding to bring her late child support payments that he should have paid prior, but whatever. And then
I was expecting you to tell me that he found a way to get invited on this trip.
No,
Okay.
no, absolutely not. She was done. She was not going to entertain that idea. No, absolutely not. And then he did actually end up buying her a ring that she was asking for a long time.
But just a random
Yeah,
gift.
just a random ring. It wasn't like a, wedding ring or anything. It was just a ring that she had her eye on for a long time. And then after she leaves him, he's like, let me do this nice thing for you that I should have done when we were still married. So December 12th, 1987, Robert went to JoAnn's new apartment, and he does this without her knowledge, and he takes the keys.
From the apartment.
Yep. Now we're going to skip to 10 p.m. that same night, Saturday, December 12th. Robert went to every time I read this, I think of like Sears in the mall, and it's just weird to me, but the Sears Castaway Lounge in Waterbury, and decides to get drunk. It's just a weird name. I'm just picturing Sears, like the department store.
Right. I'm assuming there's no affiliation with Sears, the department store mail order.
I mean, probably
company,
not,
right?
but imagine if Sears, the department store, had like a lounge where you could get drinks and then also go shopping. That would be really cool.
They'd probably still be in business.
Probably, but not I don't think so. That's a weird association. I highly doubt it.
Who doesn't want to get drunk and shop for like household
I
appliances?
mean, I would, but this lounge, 100%, especially in Waterbury, it's probably like some weird place where people go to like die. That's probably what this lounge is. So he decides to get drunk. He spots a woman at the quote unquote lounge. I have lounge in quotes every time because it's probably not a lounge. It's probably just gross. That catches his eye and decides to introduce himself to her. So Robert and Mary Jane Modine talk and dance for hours until the lounge closed around 2 a.m. So it's now after 2 a.m. and it's now obviously Sunday, December 13th. And Robert convinces Mary Jane to accompany him back to his apartment. He does try to sleep with Mary Jane, but she turns him down. Smart woman. And so at this point, he was like, you know what? You actually have to leave. I have to go do something. He actually said to her, I have to do something. To me, very ominous. It's just, you have been drinking. It's late. that's strange. So he brings her back to her apartment. And this is just before 3 a.m. And then he drives to the apartment complex where JoAnn had moved with her son, Bobby.
That he has the keys to.
Yep. I don't want to call him Robert Jr. because I don't want him to be affiliated with his father, because I think his father is the devil. So his mother called him Bobby, and I'm going to call him Bobby from here on out.
All right.
I have trigger warning in bold red. This is going to be a very brutal attack. But I think it's important to be detailed, because I think it is a testament to his character and his rage and the mental state that he was in. Because he tries to plead insanity, but this is calculated and planned. In my eyes, the fact that he brought the keys home with him earlier in the day shows premeditation. I'm not an expert, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that, he didn't take them to commit a crime against her, but to, snoop on her and see what she was up to. But I think it's fair to say that he had, no, I am with you. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, right? Like, it could and it could not be. Do I think it is in this situation? Yes, I do.
Exactly. So, boom. So he breaks into the house, and I'm saying that because I don't care if he had the keys. That's a break-in. He didn't have the keys legally.
Well, yeah, if you're not invited in, it's a break-in.
He broke in carrying a 5-inch blade, and he makes his 5-inch blade. Makes his way up the stairs to JoAnn's bedroom where she was sleeping. This is the worst part to me, because I can't imagine. She probably felt safe. I'm going to get upset. She probably felt safe in her new home. She probably felt like she got herself out of a very tumultuous and dangerous situation with her son, Bobby, who was known as like a sweet, shy boy, and JoAnn was known as just a very kind, lively person. She's probably thinking that she's out. She's made it out, unsuspecting.
Right, she's past the worst.
And it just, that this happened when they were sleeping, for some reason, it just makes it way worse to me. They didn't have any opportunity to defend themselves at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's everybody's nightmare, right? You wake up and there's somebody in your house.
So he begins beating her, brutally beating her, and also stabbing her. I want to emphasize that Robert is not a small man. JoAnn was sleeping and she was brutally stabbed and beaten, but she managed to get away from him and attempt to get out of the room. And I think that is a demonstration of what a fighter she was and how strong she was inside leaving him, and then outside being able to fight him off and almost get away. So I think that's a testament to how strong she is as a person. Unfortunately, Robert was able to catch her again, and he continued his attack, causing multiple scrapes, wounds, and bruises across her neck, chest, and face. Robert killed JoAnn when he inserted the knife through her neck, which transected the carotid artery. And I think that's a very, very important detail, because that is a vicious and disgusting way to kill somebody.
Well, it's very personal.
Yep. Yeah. So while this attack on his mother is happening, Bobby was asleep, but he was woken up when he heard his mother crying for help. And I can't even imagine, this kid's 16. It's just, but he's brave. He goes to the bedroom to see what's going on and to try to help her. And then he sees his father. That I can't imagine. Like, you hear your mother screaming for help, and then you see that it's your father that's doing that attack. My brain can't even go there. And then Robert goes to attack his son. His only child, Robert Jr. Not it's his son, but that's his junior. And he goes to try to kill him. Like, I don't understand this logic at all.
I would have expected you to say it was the other way around.
Nope. Brutally attacks him. He manages to escape the bedroom with defensive wounds. He had gashes in his forearms and hands, and he then proceeded to make his way down the stairs to the first floor of the apartment. But he followed Bobby, and he attacked him before he reached the first floor, and repeatedly stabbed his own child in the chest, face, neck. Does that sound familiar? The same places he stabbed his father, the same places he stabbed JoAnn. Bobby died the exact same way that his mother died, which I thought was really eerie and just unsettling. Severed the carotid artery, and they both bled out and died in the same exact fashion.
That's just so fucked up. Like,
yeah.
I never understood why these quote unquote family annihilators or whatever you guys call them.
Hey, you always laugh at me when I use that term, but
it's fucking stupid.
It's a good term though. That's what they are.
I mean, they're just assholes. But
it's dramatic because it's true. They're annihilating their entire family.
Yeah, I don't know how you get from. I don't know how that math works out in your head. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
People are sick. People, I think, are sick. People, I think, are narcissistic. I think people. I'm not saying that he didn't have mental issues, but I think like the fact that JoAnn left, she took the son. This is personal. How dare you leave me? Nobody leaves me. And I think this is the same case for most people that decide to kill their entire family, that or they have an ulterior motive. Like with Chris Watts, he wanted to kill his family because he wanted to be with that woman that he met. But I mean, this is something that I think people take personal and they just see nothing but red and they just want to get their revenge.
The only thing I can think of is it's this mindset of if I can't have you, then nobody can.
Josh Powell,
yeah,
killed Susan and his children. It's the same mentality. But to me, I understand the heartbreak and how devastating it is when you lose your family. But I don't understand how your brain can ever get to, hey, these are people I love and I'm sad that I lost, but let me just kill them. It doesn't make, it's gross. There's no other word for it. It's disgusting. What is really unsettling to me is the way he acted after the attacks, like nothing ever happened, not even shaken up a bit. This to me is also a testament that he is not insane because he tries to conceal the crime after. That to me shows that you're sane. You know what's going on. So he goes to work the same day. So Sunday evening. He goes to work. So he gets rehired because he was a good worker after the reorganization. I think he was rehired like a year or two later. So he goes to work that same day at Somer's Thin Strip Company. And then the following morning, Monday, Robert met up with one of his coworkers, Dominic Aragema, and they drive to JoAnn's apartment. I don't even understand this. The only thing I can think of is he was trying to establish an alibi. He's like, well, somebody at some point is going to notice this, so it might as well be me because then it might give me an alibi like, hey, I was here to pick up something. I don't know. But he decides to go there with Dominic. And he walks up to the door. Dominic's in the truck, and he's like, oh, my God, there's blood on the door handle. And he runs back to the truck, and Dominic's like, let me check it out. So Dominic sees the same thing, and he calls the police. So the superintendent lets the police into the apartment. And that is when they find the scene. So they enter the building, and covered in blood, lying at the foot of the stairs in his underwear because he was asleep with his head propped up against the wall, just blood everywhere, is his son Bobby. It's just not okay. And then they found JoAnn upstairs, also covered in blood on the floor of the upstairs bedroom. So I will get more into positioning as to why she was on the bedroom floor later when we get into the appeal process. So I'm going to jump to the trial, and I'm going to get into the psychiatrist that I mentioned a few times before, Walter Borden. So he was retained by the Office of the Chief Public Defender. He was responsible for conducting a forensic psychiatric evaluation of Robert for the first penalty phase hearing. So Dr. Borden interviewed Robert, his sister Catherine, his aunt Ruth, and he reviewed several public records as well as psychological reports pertaining to Robert Sr. And these public records and the welfare records are what gave us that background on his childhood. So according to Borden, that night when Robert was recounting what happened, he told them that he had parked his car outside of his wife's apartment, ex-wife, in the parking lot, and he saw somebody walking outside, which it's Waterbury. That could be true, to be fair. It's not a very safe space.
That could be true of any apartment complex.
He said somebody that looked like they were, I don't know, maybe on drugs or something.
Suspicious.
Okay, fine. That could happen. You live in a city in Connecticut that sometimes has crime. That's fair. What I don't understand is you see that, you make note of it, you watch. That's not what he does. He grabs his knife and enters the apartment. Well, the door's locked. They're safe. They're inside. Why are you grabbing the knife and walking in? This is when it gets really weird. He walks in and he lays the keys on an ironing board and walks back to the front door with the intention, allegedly, of leaving. But for some reason, some unknown reason, he decides not to leave and he goes down to the basement. Can't explain why. He then goes back up to the first floor, and he just stands there for a while. Then he decides to go up to JoAnn's room. He claims that he just wanted to talk to her. It's like 3 a.m. You're going to sneak into her house and wake her up and try to talk to her and expect her to have a positive reaction to that? Not an appropriate time or place to try to talk to her.
No,
and I don't believe that at all.
People that I'm friends with to have a positive reaction.
No,
to that,
you broke into my
let
house.
alone my estranged ex-wife.
I'm going to take my little baton and I'm going to beat you in the head. That's what I'm going to do. Do not try to break into my house and talk to me at night. I will assault you. So she obviously does not have a positive reaction to this. And he grabs her and she starts screaming, "Bobby, call the cops. Somebody's trying to hurt me," which is reasonable. She doesn't know probably who this is for a second. It's dark. She just woke up. This makes Robert angry. And, I was just trying to get JoAnn to stop screaming, so I pushed her face down and started wrestling with her on the bed so that she would stop screaming. I know. So she ends up falling to the floor, and he gets on top of her and hits her, but only to get her to stop yelling. None of this makes sense.
No.
It's all bullshit.
I was trying to calm her down, so I hugged her with my knife.
It literally makes no sense. So a light turns on in the hallway. We all know that it was Bobby who had come to help his mother. But Robert Sr. insists at this point that he didn't realize it was Bobby. He claims, "I didn't recognize him. I didn't know who it was. It could have been a man."
Right. Who else would this random person be in this house that's
if
totally
it is
fine?
A man that she's seeing, which she has every right to, because they've been divorced for almost 12 months now, why wouldn't he be in her room? None of this makes sense.
Right. He's also been in the house for some amount of time now. He would have noticed that there was somebody in the bathroom or something.
He claimed that he didn't realize who it was, but that he heard this person say something to him. Then he realized maybe it was Bobby because the person said, "Dad, I love you." But Robert still attacked him, striking him in the head and neck. And according to Robert, it's when he finally starts striking him that he realizes it's his son. So this entire time when he's recounting the events to Warden, he's making it seem like, I think, he's saying what he needs to say to make it seem like he's in a dissociative state. I think he's playing the shit out of the psychiatrist. It's the same stuff he told police when he killed his dad. But I don't remember stabbing him. Like, it's very convenient that the only 2 times this man dissociates allegedly in his entire life is when he's committing a brutal murder.
Well, that or he's trying to cast doubt on the premeditation thing by saying that he was operating under, using incomplete information or something. Wasn't sure who it was, but there was a guy there and.
So then he says that he felt like his hand was not a part of him and that it was his hand that did these terrible things and not him.
Sometimes my hand decides to do things on its own.
That's what she said. So he was charged and convicted on April 11th, 1989, your birthday, of 1 charge of capital felony in violation of Connecticut General Statutes 53A to 54B and 2 counts of murder in violation of Statutes 53A to 54A. This was for intentionally killing his wife and son, but Connecticut added an aggravating factor, which I 1,000% endorse, that he committed these murders in an especially cruel manner. And I think we can all agree that that is fact. He appealed this many times. So he immediately filed an expedited appeal to dismiss the aggravating factor portion. But on July 25th of 1989, Connecticut Supreme Court decided to proceed with the capital sentence hearing. A jury found an aggravating factor and no mitigating factor. So this obviously confirmed his guilt of a capital felony. On October 27th of 1989, the jury imposed the death penalty. This is almost 2 years after their murders. Robert appealed, but the Connecticut Supreme Court affirmed their conviction. They did, however, conclude that there were ambiguities in the sentencing verdict form, as well as in the trial court's jury's instructions regarding the sentencing phase of trial. So because of these 2 things that were kind of ambiguous regarding the jury and sentencing, they were like, all right, we'll give you this. So on August 22nd of 1995, the death penalty sentence was reversed and the case was remanded so that they could have a new penalty phase hearing. So they remanded it, but they were like, it's not completely off the table. You need to go through another trial and another resentencing. So during this remand, Robert elected to hold a new hearing before a 3-judge panel. Robert defended his innocence by reason of insanity and appealed just appeals up the wazoo. In April of 1997, during the second penalty phase hearing, Robert wanted life without parole on the basis of insanity instead of death. And there were additional facts that were presented surrounding his father's death, which I thought was interesting. So on December 12th of 1966, his grandmother, and this, I think, points to the fact that there might be way more to him murdering his father than what everybody initially knew. So his grandmother testified that Robert had actually taken the knife into the bathroom. He didn't grab it out because she was being attacked. And he left the bathroom and immediately came out and attacked the father. That fight between the grandmother and the father did not exist. That he walked in with a knife, came out, and then immediately attacked the father.
So the fight she's alleging never happened?
This is specifically to the detail because Robert said that he had retreated to the bathroom because his father attacked him, and that now Roland was attacking his grandmother, and that's why he came out and attacked him.
Right, he came out to defend her.
Yes. So she's saying that he brought the knife into the bathroom, and then he immediately came right out and attacked him. So additionally, Robert himself testified that his father had actually only hit him one time the entire time they lived together. And he wasn't repeatedly physically abusive to him.
We don't know if that's true, though, right?
That's what Robert himself testified. He said, no, actually, my dad only hit me once. So why would he?
I don't know. I wonder if maybe he's just trying to look back in a more positive way after the fact.
No, I think he lied.
About the abuse?
Yes. Well, no, I think his father did drink, and his father was not a good person, but I don't think his dad beat the shit out of him all the time like he said. I think he said that at the time to try to get out of it when he committed the crime. That's not saying that his dad wasn't a bad person. I'm not negating that, right? But somebody could be a bad person and a horrendous parent. That doesn't mean that you should stab them and kill them. So the panel denied the motion for a life sentence and ultimately reimposed a sentence of death again on January 9th, 1998. Robert appealed. Shocker. And on May 14th, 1999, he filed a petition for a new trial for both the guilty and penalty phase based on newly discovered transcripts from his case with his father. But on January 8th of 2002, the Connecticut Supreme Court, they continued the appeal. So they were like, all right, we'll take this to trial. We'll give you a new trial. But what's interesting is Robert withdrew his petition with prejudice. And that means that everything that he put in this appeal cannot be brought up again. So I thought it was interesting that he appealed it, or withdrew it rather.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But again, on December 2nd of 2003, he filed a pro se petition for a writ of habeas corpus appeal in 2003, which was meant to appeal his death sentence. This means that he's choosing to represent himself without an attorney, and a writ of habeas corpus appeal is meant to determine if an individual's imprisonment is actually lawful or not. But I just thought it was interesting that he decided to try to represent himself. So a trial date was set for October of 2005. I'm going to get into some details of the appeal because I think it's important. So clinical psychologist Ann M. Phillips did testify that in her professional opinion, based on various diagnostic tests and interviews that she had with Robert, he had mixed personality disorder with paranoid, schizoid, and depressive features. So she essentially boiled that down to Robert had a very intense need for self-protection, self-preservation. He had an impaired mental capacity, and he was highly dependent, which I think is understandable given his background. Robert's sister, Catherine, verified that they had a very traumatic childhood. She actually went on into further detail saying that Hazel, their mother, would leap out of moving cars frequently in an attempt to end her own life in front of these kids. Horrible.
That'll fuck you up.
Yeah. I mean, everything they've gone through, but Catherine didn't murder somebody. So, you know what I mean?
Did she provide any insight into the alleged abuse by his father?
She confirmed everything. Yeah.
Okay.
Then she said that their mother, Hazel, would also throw frequent like strip poker parties, insane strip poker parties. But this is really messed up. She would sedate the children, like just drug the hell out of them to keep them docile and knocked out while she partied and drank and did all this crazy stuff. It's really messed up. I mean, these kids were not given any chance, and I do sympathize in that aspect. All right, so big trigger warning. I'm going to get into way more details about the actual crime itself, and I'm not doing that for shock value. I'm doing it because the biggest thing that Robert has tried to argue is that basically he's saying that the evidence presented by the state at the second penalty phase of the hearing failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed the capital felony in an especially cruel manner. And this was that aggravating factor that the state had added onto the charge, which was really the biggest factor in the death penalty.
I don't know how he could try to argue that this wasn't an especially cruel manner. Like, you broke into your ex-wife's house.
Well, that is irrelevant.
Well, no, but then you murdered your ex-wife and your son by essentially, I don't know if he slit their throats, but he stabbed them in the neck or something. Either way, he severed both their carotid arteries.
We're going to talk about that actually right now.
That's extremely personal.
In more detail.
How is that not aggravated?
So we're going to talk about that in more detail. So trigger warning, and I'm going to get into a lot of their wounds in a lot more detail, not because I want to be gross, but because I think it's important, because this was his biggest argument, or one of his, I mean, he made many different claims: ineffective counsel, failure to provide evidence of PTSD. But this one, I think it's important to emphasize. I think there was definitely premeditation, but then the brutality of his crimes. And I think that this is also a perfect description of what kind of person he is. I think that Robert, unfortunately, based on his upbringing, but I think that he's been a violent person for a very long time. And if this didn't happen to JoAnn and his son Bobby, it would have happened to somebody else. So I don't know how to say this person's name. I'm going to try my hardest. Arkady Katz-Nelson was the associate medical examiner, and Henry Lee, the state's chief criminalist and director of the state police forensic lab, testified the following facts. And again, trigger warning. So Robert brutally beat JoAnn before killing her. She had numerous and extensive contusions and abrasions that were caused by blunt trauma by his fists on her forehead, both of her cheeks, both of her eyes, both of her arms, across her knees, legs, and chin. There was an extensive amount of blood found in her nose and mouth from being beaten brutally while she was alive by her ex-husband. And it is a fact that these injuries were caused by multiple blows and that she was alive when she went through this whole ordeal. Robert stabbed JoAnn 3 times, once in the chest, and this went through the muscles of the chest. It didn't go into the cavity, but it came very close, and that is deep. So he stabbed her twice in the neck. One of these wounds entered the front of her throat and exited the right side of her neck, completely severing the carotid artery.
So it went from one side to the other.
Yeah. This is a brutal,
that's wild,
forceful attack. There is nothing that's not extremely cruel about this attack. It is lengthy, it is not quick, and she has a lot of wounds.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious how they tried to argue that this wasn't
He did this by himself at this point. He chose not to have counsel. I don't know. I think this guy's grasping
straws. How do you say that this isn't as bad as it is? I don't even know where you start.
He's nuts. So regarding Bobby, and I'm just going to read direct quotes from the appeal documents. And again, this is trigger warning. It's graphic. The defendant cut and stabbed Bobby repeatedly with a long, sharp instrument before he inflicted the fatal wound. During the course of this assault, Bobby suffered a 2 1/2 inch long incised wound on his right cheek, an incised wound on the front of his chest with a blunt force contusion and abrasion just below it, a stab incised wound on his upper left arm, and defensive wounds across the palms and fingers of his right hand, indicating that he had attempted to grab the knife. This is really sad to me. I can't imagine thinking about having to fight off your father. In addition, Bobby suffered 2 defensive wounds to his right arm, one of which was extensive, measuring 6 inches in length and exposing underlying muscle. 2 defensive wounds on the top of his left hand, and an extensive stab wound measuring approximately 4 inches in length on his back, close to his left shoulder. From that shoulder wound, there was a 10-inch 10-inch incised wound leading up to his left shoulder. He suffered stab wounds on his right elbow, under his chin, and on the upper part of his neck, a stab wound to the left side of the neck that measured 1 1/4 inches across and 5 inches deep, and a large stab incised wound on the right side of his neck that measured 5 inches in length and almost completely severed his carotid artery. It was the stab wound to the right side of his neck that ultimately caused Bobby to bleed to death. All of the wounds were inflicted while Bobby was alive and conscious. This is overkill. This is anger and rage. It's disgusting. It's depraved. It's cruel. It's senseless.
And it's extremely personal.
Exactly.
I mean, if you talk to anybody, whether police, ex-military, people that are in jail for doing crimes like this, they all say, when you kill somebody with a knife, it is extremely personal.
Yeah. But this is obviously like overkill. The amount of injuries, he has a 10-inch wound. It's just incredibly cruel and tortuous, I would argue, that he tortured his ex-wife and his son in their last moments alive. And they were alive and conscious for it all, which makes me really upset. It's gross. So I'm going to read a lengthy passage from this case regarding the determination of the appeal. So, quote, after a jury convicted the defendant of all counts, a separate sentencing hearing was conducted pursuant to General Statutes 53A to 46A, at which the same jury considered further evidence, the evidence that I had mentioned, and then other evidence, but I just didn't want to get into it all. At the conclusion of the sentencing phase of the trial, the jury found an aggravating factor and no mitigating factor. In accordance with the jury's findings, the trial court rendered judgment of guilty of capital felony and imposed the death penalty on the defendant. The defendant then appealed to this court pursuant to General Statutes 51 through 199 and General Statutes 53A to 46B. We concluded that there were ambiguities in the special verdict form and in the trial court's jury instructions in the sentencing phase of the trial, and, accordingly, we reversed the judgment imposing the death penalty and remanded the case for a new penalty phase hearing, which is the one that I just talked about, where they had the other psychiatrist come in and his sister and what have you. So, quote, on remand, the defendant elected to hold his new penalty phase hearing before a 3-judge panel pursuant to General Statutes 53A to 46A and General Statutes 53A to 45B and 54 to 82B. The chief court administrator appointed a panel consisting of judges Fasano, Damiani, and Vertifioli. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to say that name. It's very Italian, to hear the case. At the hearing, the state claimed as an aggravating factor that the defendant had committed the offense in an especially cruel manner within the meaning of 53A to 46A. The defendant claimed 2 statutory and 25 non-statutory mitigating factors. The panel found that the state had proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant had committed both murders in an especially cruel manner. The panel also found that the defendant had proved by a preponderance of the evidence the factual underpinnings of certain claimed non-statutory mitigating factors, but that none of the proved factors alone or in combination constituted mitigation, considering all of the facts and circumstances of the case. In accordance with these findings, the panel rendered judgment sentencing the defendant to death.
Good.
Robert Breton still sits on death row, along with 9 other men in Connecticut awaiting capital punishment that may never come. In 2012, Connecticut abolished the death penalty for all future crimes, leaving an uncertainty for those who have already had their fates decided by jury. And that was the murder of JoAnn Breton and Bobby Breton. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, if you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe, and leave us a review wherever you listen. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at @that_pod and at @thatpod on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. You can also find us on Patreon at @thatpod, where we have bonus episodes, swag, and shout outs.